Ever sworn on your life? Made a pinky promise? What if breaking that promise meant actual death? Number 10. Do you even know what you're promising? In medieval times, oaths weren't just words. They were the glue that held everything together in a world without police, social security, or government ID cards. When a medieval person swore an oath, they were literally putting their immortal soul on the line. Breaking your word wasn't just being dishonest, it was risking eternal damnation. Picture this: you're a peasant in 12th century England. You've never traveled more than 10 miles from your village. You can't read. There are no newspapers, no internet, no way to verify information except through people you trust. In this world, a person's word was everything. If the local lord promised protection in exchange for your labor and a chunk of your harvest, you needed to believe he'd follow through when raiders came knocking. Likewise, when you swore to work his land faithfully, he needed to know you wouldn't bail during planting season. These weren't casual promises either. Medieval oaths were serious business, often performed in churches on holy relics or with one hand on a Bible. The ceremony itself mattered as much as the words. When William the Conqueror had his nobles swear loyalty after taking England in 1066, they didn't just say, "I promise." They knelt before him, placed their hands in his, and pledged their service while everyone watched. Try backing out of that without looking like a total jerk to everyone who mattered. Oaths created society itself, explains medieval historian Dr. Eleanor Jameson of Oxford University. Without modern institutions, personal bonds of loyalty formed the structure that held communities together. Breaking an oath wasn't just disappointing someone, it was tearing at the fabric of social order. Number 9. Knights, kings, and promises that built kingdoms. Would you die for your boss? How about kill for them? Medieval knights didn't just think about this question, they lived it. The entire feudal system operated on a chain of personal loyalty oaths that connected everyone from the lowliest peasant all the way up to the king. Knights stood in the middle of this chain, swearing fealty to nobles who, in turn, swore allegiance to greater lords or monarchs. The ceremony of homage was intense. A knight would kneel before his lord, place his hands between his master's hands, and recite a vow that basically said, "I am your man." This wasn't metaphorical, it created a personal bond that transformed a warrior into someone's loyal follower. In return, the lord promised protection, justice, and often land called a fief that provided income. This relationship wasn't like modern employment, where you can give 2 weeks' notice and bounce. These oaths were meant to last for life. When King John of England ticked off his barons so badly they forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, they weren't breaking their oaths lightly. They were navigating a crisis of conflicting loyalties while trying to preserve the social order they believed in. French chronicles tell the story of William Marshal, sometimes called the greatest knight who ever lived, who served 5 English kings with unwavering loyalty. Even when King John, yes, the same one from the Magna Carta mess, treated him poorly, Marshal kept his oath. When John died in 1216, leaving his 9-year-old son as heir during a civil war, Marshal, then in his 70s, served as regent and literally saved the kingdom. That's the power an oath held for a true medieval knight. Modern people might find it hard to understand just how binding these promises were, says Dr. Marcus Steinberg of Berlin University. A knight's entire identity and honor were wrapped up in keeping his word. Breaking an oath meant becoming an oath breaker, a person who couldn't be trusted by anyone. It was social death. Number 8. When God is your witness. Does God care if you keep your promises? Medieval people sure thought so. The church wasn't just another institution in medieval society, it was the institution that framed how people understood the world. Oaths were considered sacred contracts witnessed by God himself. Breaking them wasn't just letting down another person, it was sinning against the Almighty. Swearing falsely wasn't a minor transgression either. The medieval church considered perjury, lying under oath, one of the most serious sins. Sermon after sermon warned congregations about the eternal consequences of breaking sworn promises. Imagine living in a society where everyone truly believed that breaking their word could result in their soul burning forever. that puts some serious weight behind "I promise." The sacred nature of oaths explains why they were often taken in churches or on religious objects. When William the Conqueror tricked Harold Godwinson into swearing an oath on hidden relics, the act became spiritually binding in a way Harold never intended. According to Norman accounts, this oath-breaking justified William's invasion of England in 1066. Whether you believe that reasoning or not, it clearly mattered enough to be central to William's propaganda. Religious authorities didn't just preach about oaths, they administered them. Church courts handled cases of broken promises and perjury. In many regions, bishops oversaw oaths of fealty between lords and vassals, adding divine witness to these crucial social bonds. Even the coronation of kings involved sacred oaths, turning political leadership into a covenant with both the people and God. The Church's involvement gave oaths a transcendent power, explains Dr. Sophia Cunningham, medieval religious historian. When a medieval person swore by all that is holy, they were invoking powers they genuinely feared and respected. It wasn't dramatic language, it was bringing the divine directly into human affairs. Number 7. The everyday oaths that made society function. Ever promise to return a borrowed pen? In medieval times, similar small promises kept communities running. While knights swearing fealty to kings makes for dramatic history, ordinary people relied on oaths for everyday survival. Medieval villages weren't just random collections of households, they were oath-bound communities where neighbors pledged mutual aid and protection. The frank pledge system in England organized men into groups of 10, called tithings, where each member was responsible for the good behavior of all others. If one person committed a crime, everyone in the tithing could be punished if they didn't bring the offender to justice. Talk about peer pressure. These groups swore oaths to maintain the peace and report wrongdoing, creating a neighborhood watch system powered by sacred promises. Guilds, organizations of craftsmen like bakers, blacksmiths, or weavers, required elaborate oaths from new members. These weren't just professional associations, but brotherhoods bound by sworn commitments to maintain quality standards, support members in hard times, and keep trade secrets. Breaking guild oaths could result in being kicked out, economic death in a world where independent work was nearly impossible. Even marriage was fundamentally an oath-based relationship. Wedding vows weren't just romantic traditions but binding contracts that established everything from property rights to sexual fidelity. The Church's increasing control over marriage during the medieval period meant these personal promises became sacred covenants. Justice itself depended on oaths. Without forensic science, medieval courts relied heavily on sworn testimony. Compurgation, a practice where defendants brought oath helpers who would swear to their good character or innocence, shows how much weight society placed on the reliability of promises. If 12 respected people swore you couldn't have committed a crime, that often counted more than circumstantial evidence. Medieval communities ran on trust networks reinforced by oaths, says social historian Dr. Thomas Jenkins. Without modern identity documents or credit checks, knowing someone was bound by their sworn word was the closest thing to security people had. Number 6. When oaths clash, the medieval loyalty dilemma. What happens when you've promised two different things that turn out to be incompatible? Welcome to the medieval loyalty crisis. The complex web of oaths that structured medieval society sometimes created impossible situations. A knight might swear loyalty to a lord who later rebelled against the king, to whom the knight had also sworn allegiance. Which oath takes precedence? This wasn't just a theoretical problem, but one that regularly tore apart kingdoms and consciences. During the anarchy, a civil war in 12th century England, nobles found themselves caught between oaths to King Stephen and competing promises to Empress Matilda. Some switched sides multiple times, trying to navigate conflicting obligations. Each side considered the other oath breakers, while those caught in the middle performed elaborate justifications for their choices. The Church sometimes provided escape hatches from impossible oath situations. Popes could release people from certain promises, particularly if they decided the oath had been coerced or violated religious principles. This power became politically significant when popes released subjects from allegiance to excommunicated monarchs, effectively giving religious permission for rebellion. Literature from the period reveals how deeply these conflicts resonated. Tales of King Arthur frequently feature knights torn between competing loyalties to their king, their personal honor, forbidden loves, or higher principles. These weren't just entertaining stories, but explorations of real moral dilemmas that medieval people faced. The medieval mind was deeply concerned with oath conflicts, explains literary historian Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery. The stories we have from this period repeatedly return to questions of competing loyalties because they represented genuine crises in a society built on personal bonds. Number 5. Oath breakers, the ultimate medieval villains. What's worse than a murderer? In medieval eyes, possibly an oath breaker. Few crimes damaged a person's reputation more thoroughly than breaking sworn promises. The Old English word mansworn, oath breaker, carried a stigma that could follow someone for life. Literature and historical records show oath breakers portrayed with particular contempt, often punished not just legally but with divine retribution. This attitude makes sense in a world where trust networks were essential for survival. Someone who broke solemn promises couldn't be relied upon in any context. Would you want an oath breaker watching your back in battle? Handling your money? Marrying into your family? Medieval people certainly didn't. Chronicles often explain military defeats or personal misfortunes as divine punishment for broken oaths. When Harold Godwinson lost to William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, Norman accounts emphasized his supposed oath-breaking as the reason God abandoned him. True or not, the explanation resonated with medieval audiences who expected cosmic consequences for violated promises. The punishment for oath-breaking varied by context but could be severe. Knights who broke fealty might forfeit their lands and titles. Guild members who violated their oaths faced expulsion and economic ruin. Those who committed perjury in court could face fines, imprisonment, or even execution in serious cases. Beyond formal penalties, the social stigma often amounted to a kind of living death exclusion from the trust networks that made medieval life possible. Oath-breaking wasn't just seen as a personal failure but a threat to the entire social order, explains legal historian Dr. James Richardson. Medieval society lacked the impersonal institutions we rely on today. Without trustworthy oaths, the whole system risked collapse. Number 4. Oaths as performance, the spectacle of medieval loyalty. Did you know medieval oaths were more like getting married than signing a contract? Medieval people understood something we often forget. Promises made publicly carry more weight than those made in private. Oaths weren't typically quiet, personal affairs but elaborate public performances with specific gestures, words, and witnesses designed to make breaking them as difficult as possible. When a vassal swore fealty to a lord, everyone who mattered watched. The ceremony typically took place in the lord's great hall, with other vassals, church officials, and household members present. The physical posture, kneeling, hands clasped between the lords, created a memorable tableau of submission and acceptance. These weren't just formalities but theatrical elements that ensured everyone remembered exactly what had been promised and to whom. Objects often played important roles in oath ceremonies. Swearing on religious relics, swords, or other significant items added tangible weight to spoken words. In some regions, vassals might place their hands on a Bible while pledging loyalty, literally connecting their promises to sacred text. Municipal officials might swear their oaths of office while touching the town charter or keys to the city gates. Words mattered too. Oaths followed specific formulas, often invoking divine punishment if broken. "May God strike me down if I fail in this duty" wasn't dramatic flourish but a genuine invitation for divine enforcement. The precision of language in medieval oaths resembles modern legal documents, both aimed to eliminate ambiguity and loopholes. These performative elements served practical purposes. In a society with limited literacy, memorable ceremonies helped preserve the exact terms of agreements. The public nature created widespread witnesses who could later confirm what had been promised. The physical and emotional impact of the ritual itself made the oath more psychologically binding for the person swearing it. Medieval people understood that humans need more than just words to feel truly committed, explains cultural anthropologist Dr. Maria Hernandez. The combination of physical gestures, sacred objects, specific language, and public witness created an experience that was difficult to dismiss or forget when temptation to break an oath arose. Number 3. Women and oaths, complicated loyalty in a patriarchal world. Could women swear oaths in medieval society? Yes, but with significant complications. Medieval society placed women in a contradictory position regarding oaths and allegiance. On one hand, women were often considered legally subordinate to male relatives, limiting their ability to make independent pledges. On the other hand, noble women, especially heiresses and widows, sometimes controlled significant resources and needed to participate in the oath-based feudal system. For noble women, marriage created particularly complex loyalty situations. A woman born into one noble family would swear marriage vows binding her to another, potentially creating conflicts between birth family loyalty and marital obligations. These tensions frequently played out during wars and succession crises. When Eleanor of Aquitaine supported her son's rebellion against her husband, King Henry II of England, she wasn't just being a difficult spouse, she was navigating competing webs of family loyalty. Queens occupied especially complicated positions. They were expected to show primary allegiance to their husband kings, yet many also served as regents for young sons or acted as diplomatic links to their birth families. Queen Philippa of Hainault, wife of Edward III of England, famously intervened to save the burghers of Calais from execution, demonstrating how queens could use their influence while still honoring their primary loyalties. Women's religious oaths sometimes provided alternative avenues of power and identity. Abbesses of major convents swore religious vows but also functioned somewhat like feudal lords, managing extensive properties and commanding the loyalty of dependent communities. Their oaths to the church created authority that partially counterbalanced the male-dominated secular hierarchy. Medieval women navigated oath-based society with remarkable strategic skill, explains feminist historian Dr. Rebecca Williams. Despite legal constraints, many noble women mastered the art of balancing competing loyalties and using oath relationships to protect their interests and those of their children. Number 2. Oaths across cultures, not just a European thing. Think oath-based loyalty was just a European phenomenon, think again. While European feudalism provides the most familiar examples, societies worldwide developed their own oath-based systems for creating reliable bonds between individuals and groups. The medieval Japanese samurai swore intense loyalty oaths to their daimyo lords that parallel European knights' fealty in many respects. The Bushido Code emphasized personal loyalty as the highest virtue, with elaborate ceremonies marking the establishment of these bonds. In the Islamic world, the concept of bay'ah represented a formal oath of allegiance to a caliph or other leader. These pledges created binding relationships between rulers and subjects, often invoking religious authority similar to European practices. When the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyad Caliphate in 750 CE, gathering public bay'ah from prominent figures legitimized their claim to rule. African kingdoms from Mali to Zimbabwe utilized oath-based systems to maintain political cohesion across diverse territories. The Songhai Empire, which reached its height in the 15th and 16th centuries, employed elaborate loyalty ceremonies that bound provincial governors to the central authority in Gao through personal oaths reinforced by religious sanction. Even in the Americas, Aztec nobles swore formal allegiance to the emperor in ceremonies that included blood offerings, creating sacred bonds between ruler and elites. The Inca Empire demanded loyalty oaths from conquered peoples, often symbolized through the exchange of textiles and other valuable goods that represented ongoing obligations. These cross-cultural similarities suggest something universal about how human societies create reliable commitments in the absence of impersonal institutions. The specific forms varied widely, but the fundamental concept, making promises binding through ceremony, witnesses, and spiritual significance, appears remarkably consistent across medieval civilizations. What's fascinating is how independently different societies developed similar solutions to the problem of ensuring loyalty, notes comparative historian Dr. Michael Zhang. Whether in feudal Europe, samurai Japan, or the Mali Empire, rulers understood that personal bonds, publicly declared and spiritually sanctioned, created the strongest possible obligations. Number 1. From oaths to contracts, how modern society changed the game. Do you sign contracts without reading them? Our medieval ancestors would be horrified. The transition from medieval to modern society didn't happen overnight, but one of the most significant changes was how we create and enforce obligations. The personal, public, sacred oaths that structured medieval life gradually gave way to written contracts, professional bureaucracies, and impersonal legal systems. This transformation began earlier than you might think. By the late medieval period, written documents were already supplementing verbal oaths in many contexts. Town charters, guild regulations, and royal decrees increasingly put promises in writing, though usually still backed by sworn oaths. As literacy spread among merchants and officials, written records became more important for tracking complex obligations. The Protestant Reformation accelerated these changes by challenging the Church's role in mediating oaths. In some regions, religious reformers questioned whether Christians should swear oaths at all, citing biblical passages that seemed to prohibit the practice. Even where oath-taking continued, its religious significance often diminished, making way for more secular understandings of obligation. The rise of modern nation-states fundamentally altered the loyalty equation. Gradually, personal allegiance to specific lords transformed into more abstract citizenship obligations to the state itself. By the 18th century, many European countries had developed professional bureaucracies and standing armies that functioned through institutional rather than personal loyalty. Contract law developed as commercial society expanded, creating enforceable obligations without the need for personal relationships or religious sanctions. Modern contracts don't require God as witness, just clear terms and state-backed courts willing to enforce them. This shift allowed business relationships to extend far beyond networks of personal trust, enabling the complex global economy we know today. The medieval mentality would find our casual approach to promises almost incomprehensible, explains social historian Dr. Vanessa Roberts. We click "I agree" on terms of service without reading them, sign contracts with entities we'll never meet in person, and generally expect systems rather than personal honor to enforce obligations. Medieval people would likely see this as both liberating and deeply disturbing. Do you still feel the echoes of medieval oath culture in your life? When was the last time you truly gave your word, knowing your reputation and relationships hung in the balance?